She mocked the human mechanic with her disabled dragon, but she soon regretted it. Steam hissed from the damaged hull of the war cruiser as emergency lights painted everything in angry red. The ship that had once struck fear into the hearts of pirates across 3 sectors now sat broken and helpless in the repair bay. Sparks flew from exposed wiring while coolant leaked onto the metal floor in steady drops. Captain. Lyra pressed her clawed hand against the viewing window, watching her pride and joy suffer in silence. The draconian officer had commanded the Crimson Fury for 8 years, and never once had she felt this helpless. Her golden scales, normally bright with health and authority, had dulled to a sickly bronze color. The stress of the past 3 days showed in every line of her powerful frame. Her second officer, Commander Roth, approached with careful steps. He knew better than to disturb his captain when she was in one of these moods, but duty demanded he deliver the latest reports. The younger draconian cleared his throat softly and waited for permission to speak. Report, Lyra said, without turning around. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had not slept properly in days. The quantum drive core is completely dead, Captain. Chief Engineer Stone says the cascade failure burned out the primary matrix and 3 backup systems. We're looking at a complete rebuild. Roth paused, knowing his next words would not be welcome. The repair crew estimates 6 weeks minimum, assuming they can get the right parts. Lyra's tail, thick as a man's arm and covered in protective scales, lashed once behind her. It was a sign that any smart draconian would recognize as dangerous. 6 weeks? We don't have 6 weeks. Command expects us back in the Outer Rim within 10 days to begin the reconnaissance mission. I know, Captain, but our own engineers are stumped. The humans at this station claim they don't have anyone qualified to work on draconian quantum systems. Roth hesitated again, then pushed forward with the rest of his report. However, there is one option the station master mentioned. Go on. There's an independent contractor here, a human mechanic named David Quinn. According to his file, he's worked on ships from over 20 different species. His success rate is impressive, even with complex repairs. Lyra finally turned away from the window and Roth took an involuntary step backward. Her eyes blazed with the golden fire that had earned her the nickname Dragon's Wrath among her crew. When she spoke, her voice was low and dangerous. You're suggesting I trust my ship to a human? Those short-lived creatures who discovered space flight only a few hundred years ago, they barely understand the basics of quantum mechanics, let alone the advanced systems we use. She began pacing, her heavy boots ringing against the metal deck. Draconians have been building starships for 3,000 years. Our technology is perfected over millennia of development. With respect, Captain, we may not have much choice. The nearest draconian shipyard is 3 weeks away, and that's assuming we could get there on emergency power, which we can't. Roth pulled up a holographic display showing their current situation. Our fusion reactors are stable, but without the quantum drive, we're stuck here. Lyra studied the display with growing frustration. The tactical situation was clear enough. They were stranded at Meridian Station, a human trading post on the edge of nowhere. The station itself was nothing impressive, just a collection of rotating habitat rings and industrial modules built around an old asteroid, but it sat at the crossroads of several major shipping routes, which made it a convenient stopping point for vessels of all kinds. "Tell me about this human mechanic," she said, finally. Roth activated another holographic file. The image showed a human male in his mid-30s with brown hair and intelligent blue eyes. His clothing was practical, rather than fancy, work coveralls, stained with grease and quantum residue. David Quinn, age 35, born on Earth but has spent most of his adult life in space. No formal engineering degree, but his apprentice records show training under some of the best mechanics in the galaxy. Self-taught, Lyra Tone suggested. This was not a positive trait, largely. Yes, but his repair logs are remarkable. Captain, he successfully fixed everything from Centurion pleasure craft to Rigelian battle cruisers. There are testimonials here from captains of 6 different species, all praising his work. Roth scrolled through the file, highlighting various achievements. He seems to have a gift for understanding how different technologies work, even systems he's never seen before. Lyra dismissed the hologram with a wave of her hand. Pretty words from aliens, desperate enough to trust their ships to a human. That doesn't mean he can handle the complexity of a draconian quantum drive matrix. She resumed her pacing, her mind working through the limited options available. What does our chief engineer think? Stone is skeptical. He says human mechanical knowledge is too primitive to understand our systems, but he also admits he's out of ideas for fixing the cascade failure. The captain stopped pacing and stood silent for several minutes. Through the viewing window, she could see other ships in the repair bays, a mix of human freighters, alien passenger vessels, and various military craft. All of them were being worked on by teams of human technicians who seemed confident in their abilities. Captain Roth prompted gently, "I'm thinking, Commander." Lyra's voice had lost some of its edge, replaced by the weary tone of someone facing an impossible choice. If I allow this human to work on my ship and he fails, my career is over. If he succeeds but damages something in the process, my career is also over. But if I refuse his help and we miss our mission deadline, your career is over anyway. Roth finished quietly. Exactly. Lyra turned back to the window, watching a human repair crew working on a damaged freighter. Their movements were efficient and purposeful, suggesting they knew what they were doing. Very well. Arrange a meeting with this David Quinn, but make it clear that if he so much as scratches my ship's paint, he'll answer to the draconian Imperial Navy. Yes, Captain. When would you like to meet with him? Now. The longer we wait, the worse our situation becomes. Lyra straightened her uniform and checked that her sidearm was properly secured. And Commander, have security standing by, just in case. As they left the observation deck and headed toward the station's commercial district, Lyra tried to push down her growing sense of unease. Everything about this situation went against her training and instincts. Draconians were proud of their technological superiority, and for good reason. Their ships were marvels of engineering that had dominated space lanes for centuries, but pride, as her old academy instructor used to say, was a luxury that smart officers couldn't always afford. Sometimes survival required making choices that hurt your dignity but kept your crew alive. Sparks cascaded from the plasma welder as David Quinn finished sealing a crack in the aileron. Fighter's whole plating, the repair was delicate work. Aileron metal had unusual properties that made it tricky to weld without changing its molecular structure, but David had learned the technique from a master craftsman on Kepler Station 5 years ago, and his hands moved with practiced confidence. The workshop occupied a corner section of Meridian Station's main repair bay, crammed between two larger commercial operations. It wasn't much to look at. From the outside, just a collection of prefabricated modules connected by sealed walkways. But inside, the space told the story of a man who had dedicated his life to understanding how things worked. Tools from a dozen different worlds hung on pegboards along the walls. Draconian quantum scanners sat next to human plasma cutters. Rigelian biodiagnostic equipment shared shelf space with sensor and precision instruments. In one corner, a half-assembled engine from an unknown alien species served as both curiosity and learning opportunity. David shut off the welder and pulled up his protective mask, revealing a face marked by years of careful work around dangerous equipment. A thin scar ran along his left jaw where a pressurized coolant line had burst 3 years ago. His hands, though clean now, bore the permanent stains that came from handling exotic fuels and lubricants from across the galaxy. That should hold you for another 50,000 km, he called to the aileron captain, who was examining the repair with 3 of his 4 eyes. But I'd recommend a complete whole replacement when you get back to your home system. The insected alien clicked his approval and transferred the agreed payment to David's account. As the Altarian gathered his crew and prepared to leave, David began cleaning his tools. The welder needed recalibration after working with the difficult metal, and the plasma cutters focusing crystal was showing signs of wear. You, the human who thinks he can fix anything, the voice cut through the workshop's background noise like a blade through silk. David looked up to see a draconian naval officer standing in his doorway, her uniform crisp and her bearing military precise. She was tall, even by draconian standards, her scales a deep golden color that spoke of good health and high rank. The insignia on her collar marked her as a captain. David had worked on draconian ships before, though never for military personnel. The civilian vessels were impressive enough. Their engineering was sophisticated beyond what most species could achieve. But a military cruiser would be something else entirely. The Draconians didn't share their best technology with anyone, including their own civilians. I'm David Quinn, he said, setting down his tools and facing her directly. I fix what's broken regardless of who built it or how complex it is. The captain's golden eyes narrowed as she studied him. David could practically feel her cataloging every detail: his worn workflow, the stains on his hands, the various alien tools scattered around his workspace. He was used to this kind of inspection. Most aliens, especially from highly advanced species, expected human mechanics to be primitive and crude. I am Captain Lyra of the Imperial Draconian Navy, she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to being obeyed without question. My ship requires repairs that are beyond the capabilities of this station's regular maintenance crews. David nodded toward the large viewing window that looked out over the repair bays. I'm guessing you're talking about the cruiser in Bay 7, The one with the quantum drive problems, Captain Lyra's expression shifted from dismissive to surprised. How did you know that? Quantum cascade failures have a distinctive energy signature, David explained, wiping his hands on a clean rag. The radiation emissions show up on most standard sensors if you know what to look for. Plus, your ship's been venting plasma through the secondary exhaust ports for the past 2 days. That's a classic symptom of primary matrix failure. The draconian captain's mouth opened slightly, then snapped shut. David could see her reevaluating her assumptions about human technical knowledge. It was a reaction he'd gotten used to over the years. Most aliens underestimated human engineering capabilities, at least until they saw the results. You claim to understand draconian quantum systems, Lyra asked, her tone skeptical but less dismissive than before. I've worked on 3 draconian vessels in the past 4 years, David replied. 2 civilian transports and 1 private yacht. Your people build impressive ships, but they're not magic. The principles are the same as any quantum drive. You just use more sophisticated components and tighter tolerances. Lyra's scales bristled slightly, a sign of agitation that David recognized from his previous encounters with her species. Those civilian ships use simplified versions of our technology. Military vessel like the Crimson Fury incorporates systems that are classified beyond your security clearance, maybe. So David agreed, but a cascade failure is still a cascade failure. The quantum matrices destabilize, the containment fields collapse, and you lose your primary drive capability. The classification level doesn't change the physics involved. The captain began pacing around the workshop, her heavy boots ringing against the metal deck plates. She examined various tools and equipment with the eye of someone who understood engineering principles. When she stopped next to a partially disassembled Relian hyperdrive, her expression showed grudging respect for the complexity of the work. This is Relian technology, she observed. Military-grade hyperdrive from a destroyer that took battle damage 6 months ago. David confirmed the original problem was simple, a damaged field generator, but when I opened it up I found design flaws that would have caused complete system failure within another year of operation. And you fixed these flaws, David gestured to a wall display showing before and after efficiency readings. The hyperdrive now operates at 115% of its original specifications. The Relian captain was so impressed, he's recommended me to half his fleet. Lyra studied the display for several minutes, her expression unreadable. Finally, she turned back to David with something that might have been respect in her golden eyes. Very well, human, I am prepared to consider hiring you for this repair, but I want to be clear about something. The Crimson Fury is not some civilian transport or damaged freighter. It is a warship of the Draconian Imperial Navy, incorporating technology that your species didn't even dream of when we were already crossing the galaxy. Understood, David said simply. Furthermore, Lyra continued, if you damage my ship or compromise its systems in any way, you will answer to a military tribunal. The penalties for sabotaging Imperial Navy property are severe. David had expected this kind of warning. Military officers from advanced species were always paranoid about security breaches and sabotage. Captain, I've been fixing alien technology for 15 years, and I've never had a client file a complaint about my work. I'm not planning to start now. Your previous clients were not military personnel dealing with classified systems. True, David acknowledged, but broken is broken, regardless of who owns it or how classified it is. Your quantum drive has failed and you need someone who can fix it. The question is whether you want that someone to be me, or whether you'd prefer to wait 3 weeks for a draconian repair ship that might not have the right parts anyway. The captain's tail lashed once behind her. Clear sign of frustration. David could see her weighing her options, none of which were particularly appealing. Pride weared with necessity in her expression, and necessity was slowly winning. What would you need to examine my ship? She asked finally. Access to the engineering sections and your technical manuals. I'll also need to run some diagnostic scans to determine the extent of the damage. David paused, then added, and I work alone, no observers, no supervisors, and no 1 second guessing my methods. Lyra's eyes flashed dangerously. You expect me to give you unsupervised access to classified Imperial Navy systems? I expect you to let me do my job without interference. If you can't trust me that much, then find someone else to fix your ship. David's voice remained calm, but there was still underneath the polite words. For a long moment the workshop was silent except for the distant hum of station machinery. Then Captain Lyra straightened her shoulders and came to a decision that would change everything. The argument started before they even reached the Crimson Fury. Captain Lyra had agreed to let David examine her ship, but her pride made every step toward the repair bay feel like a personal defeat. She walked with military precision, her back straight and her head high, but David could see the tension in her shoulders and the way her claws occasionally extended and retracted. I want to make something clear before we proceed, Lyra said as they approached the sealed airlock leading to her ship. This examination is temporary. I am not committed to hiring you for the actual repairs. David nodded, adjusting the diagnostic scanner slung over his shoulder. Understood. You want to see if I actually know what I'm talking about before you risk your career on a human mechanic. The blunt assessment made Lyra's scales flush a darker gold, but she didn't deny it. Instead, she placed her hand on the biometric scanner and spoke her authorization code. The heavy airlock door cycled open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. The interior of the Crimson Fury was everything David had expected and more. Draconian ships were built like works of art with flowing lines and organic curves that made human vessels look crude by comparison. Corridors were wide enough to accommodate the Draconian's impressive size, and the walls were covered with displays showing ship status in flowing alien script. But underneath the beauty, David could sense the ship's pain. Lighting was dim and flickering in places. Strange vibrations ran through the deck plates under his feet. The air itself felt wrong, charged with the kind of electromagnetic interference that came from poorly contained quantum fields. Your ship is hurting, David said as they walked toward the engineering section. Lyra stopped so abruptly that David almost ran into her. What did you say? I said, your ship is hurting. Can't you feel it, the way the hull plates are stressed, the frequency of those vibrations in the deck? Your quantum cascade didn't just Damage the drive core, it's affecting the entire vessel's structural integrity. The draconian captain stared at him with an expression David couldn't quite read. You can sense that it's not magic, David replied with a slight smile. Just experience. When you've worked on as many ships as I have, you learn to listen to what they're telling you. Pure Crimson Fury is trying to tell us how badly she's been hurt. They continued through the ship in relative silence, passing crew members who stared openly at the human walking beside their captain. David ignored the attention and focused on the subtle signs of system damage around him. Emergency lighting was active in 3 different sections. He could hear the whine of overworked environmental processors trying to maintain atmosphere quality. Most telling of all, the quantum field resonance that should have been barely detectable was strong enough to make his teeth ache. The engineering section was a cathedral of advanced technology. The main quantum drive core rose 3 decks through the center of the space, its crystalline structure normally pulsing with contained energy. Now it was dark and cold, surrounded by diagnostic equipment and worried-looking draconian technicians. Chief Engineer Stone looked up as they entered, his expression shifting from hope to disappointment when he saw David. Like many draconians, Stone was built like a predator, all muscle and sharp edges. His scales were darker than Lyra's, marking him as coming from one of the warrior castes. Captain, you cannot be serious about this, Stone said without preamble. This human cannot possibly understand our quantum matrix technology. David ignored the insult and walked directly to the main diagnostic panel. The readouts were in draconian script, but the underlying data was universal. Quantum field fluctuations, energy cascade patterns, matrix stability readings. The language of physics was the same regardless of who wrote the textbooks. Your primary focusing crystal cracked along its natural fault line, David said after studying the data for several minutes. The crack propagated through the secondary matrix, causing a complete cascade failure. But that's not the real problem. Stone's jaw dropped open, revealing rows of sharp teeth. How could you possibly know that? Those readings require years of training to interpret. David pointed to a series of waveform patterns on the display. Because the frequency signatures are obvious once you know what to look for. But like I said, the cracked crystal isn't your main problem. The real issue is that your entire calibration system is wrong. Wrong? Lyra stepped forward, her voice dangerously quiet. Our calibration procedures have been perfected over centuries of use. Perfected for new crystals, maybe, but your focusing array is 6 years old, and nobody's compensated for the aging process. David pulled up additional diagnostic screens, his fingers moving confidently over the alien controls. Look at these resonance patterns. Your crystals have been drifting out of phase for months, maybe longer. The cascade failure was inevitable. Chief Engineer Stone pushed past David and examined the displays himself. His expression went from anger to confusion to dawning horror as he realized what the human was showing him. That's impossible. Stone whispered, we follow all maintenance protocols exactly. Your protocols assume the crystals maintain perfect stability throughout their operational life, David explained patiently. But quantum crystals age just like everything else. They're resonant Frequencies shift as their molecular structure changes. You need to recalibrate constantly to compensate for the drift. Lyra was studying the diagnostic data with growing alarm. You're saying this failure could have been prevented, not just prevented, it should never have happened in the first place if someone had been monitoring the crystal aging properly. David highlighted several trend lines that clearly showed the degradation pattern. Your crystals have been sending out warning signs for at least 3 months. Stone scales had flushed almost black. With shame and anger, how dare you imply that I have been negligent in my duties? I am a certified draconian engineer with 20 years of experience, and I'm sure you're very good at following procedures, David replied calmly, but sometimes procedures aren't enough. Sometimes you need to think beyond what the manual tells you. The insult hit its mark. Stone drew himself up to his impressive height and bared his teeth in the draconian equivalent of a snarl. I will not stand here and listen to some primitive human question. 3,000 years of draconian engineering excellence. Maybe that's part of the problem, David said, his voice still calm but carrying an edge of frustration. You're so focused on your ancient excellence that you can't see obvious solutions to current problems. Captain Lyra stepped between the two before the confrontation could escalate further. Enough, Stone. Return to your duties. Quinn, continue your examination. The chief engineer stalked away, his heavy footsteps echoing through the engineering section. David could feel the hostile stares of the other draconian technicians, but he ignored them and focused on the diagnostic equipment. Your quantum drive can be repaired, he said finally, but it's going to require some creative thinking. The standard draconian approach won't work because your replacement parts will have the same problems as the originals. Lyra's golden eyes narrowed. And I suppose you have a better approach. I have a different approach. Whether it's better remains to be seen. David turned away from the diagnostic panel and faced the captain directly. But I should warn you, my methods don't always look like what you'd expect from traditional draconian engineering. Meaning what? Exactly. Meaning I solve problems with whatever works, not whatever looks impressive in a technical manual. Sometimes that means using components from other species or combining technologies in ways that weren't originally intended. The horrified expression on Lyra's face suggested that this was exactly what she'd been afraid of hearing. You want to install alien components in an Imperial Navy warship. I want to fix your ship using the most effective methods available, if that means adapting some human or Centurion technology to work with your quantum matrix, then yes. Lyra began pacing around the engineering section, her agitation clear in every movement. This is madness. You're talking about contaminating centuries of perfected design with inferior alien technology. I'm talking about making your ship work. Again, David corrected. The question is whether you care more about technological purity or mission success. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Around the engineering section, draconian technicians pretended to work while actually listening to every word of the conversation. David could see the doubt in their eyes. Doubt about their captain's judgment and even considering this human's proposals. Finally, Lyra stopped pacing and faced him directly. How long would these repairs take? 48 hours, assuming I can get the components I need 48 hours, Lyra's voice cracked. Slightly, Stone said it would take 6 weeks minimum. Stone is thinking like a traditional draconian engineer. Replace like with like, follow established procedures, maintain technological purity. I'm thinking like a problem solver. David gestured toward the dead. Quantum core, your ship doesn't care about purity, it just wants to fly. Again, the captain was silent for several long minutes, weighing options. That all seemed impossible. Finally, she spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. If I allow this and you fail, my career is over. If you don't allow it and miss your mission deadline, your career is over anyway, David pointed out. Lyra's laugh was sharp and bitter. You humans have a saying about being caught between a rock and a hard place, don't you? We do, but we also have a saying about desperate times, calling for desperate measures. The captain looked around the engineering section at her worried crew, then back at the dead quantum core that represented both her ship's heart and her own professional death sentence. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of a decision that went against every instinct she'd developed over 20 years of military service. Very well, David Quinn, you have 48 hours to prove that human ingenuity is superior to draconian engineering, but if you fail, or if you damage my ship beyond repair, I will personally ensure that you never work on another vessel as long as you live. David nodded soberly, understanding the magnitude of what he was being asked to do. Fair enough, Captain, but I work alone and I work my way. No interference, no second guessing, and no lectures about proper procedures. Agreed. As David began gathering his tools and planning his approach to the seemingly impossible repair, neither he nor Captain Lyra realized that they were about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything both species believed about technology, pride, and the true meaning of engineering. Excellent sleep was impossible with the constant hum of activity echoing through the Crimson Fury's corridors. David had been working for 18 straight hours, and the Draconian crew was beginning to understand that this human approached engineering problems unlike anything they had ever seen before. Instead of starting with the damaged quantum core, David had spent the first 6 hours crawling through maintenance tunnels that most Draconians couldn't even fit into. He carried portable scanners and diagnostic equipment, mapping every system connection and power flow throughout the ship. To the watching crew members, it looked like he was wasting valuable time on unnecessary busy work. What is he doing now? Captain Lyra demanded as she watched David emerge from an access tunnel covered in quantum residue and coolant stains. Commander Roth consulted his data pad, trying to make sense of the human's activities. He appears to be listening to the ship's internal systems, Captain. He's been taking audio recordings of various mechanical sounds throughout the vessel, listening. What possible diagnostic value could that have? Down in the engineering section, David was proving that human senses could be remarkably effective diagnostic tools. He pressed his ear against different sections of the hull plating, listening to the subtle vibrations that ran through the ship's structure. Each sound told a story about stress patterns, power fluctuations, and system interactions that even advanced Draconian sensors might miss. Your starboard stabilizer is running hot, he called up to Chief Engineer Stone, who was watching from the observation deck with barely concealed Hostility. Impossible, Stone replied. All stabilizer temperatures are within normal parameters. David pulled out a handheld thermal scanner and aimed it at the section of hull he'd been listening to. The reading showed a temperature spike that was subtle but definitely above normal operating levels. Your sensors might say it's normal, but your ship is telling a different story. That stabilizer bearing is going to fail. Within the next 100 flight hours, Stone rushed down to check the readings himself, his expression shifting from skepticism to alarm as he confirmed what the human had detected. How did you know? That our automated monitoring system showed no problems. Automated systems are good, but they're not perfect, David explained, wiping coolant residue from his hand. Sometimes you have to use your natural senses to catch problems that slip through the electronic filters. As the hours passed, David's diagnostic approach began to reveal the true extent of the Crimson Fury's problems. The quantum cascade failure had been like a stone thrown into a still pond. The initial damage had created ripple effects throughout multiple ship systems. Traditional draconian repair protocols would have addressed each problem separately, requiring weeks of work and massive amounts of replacement components. But David saw connections that the draconians missed. He understood that fixing the quantum core properly would require addressing the secondary system failures first, creating a stable foundation for the primary repair. It was like performing surgery on a patient while simultaneously treating their blood pressure and monitoring their heart rhythm. This is unprecedented, Stone admitted as he reviewed David's diagnostic findings. I count 17 separate system malfunctions that we had not detected. 18, David corrected, pointing to a power coupling that showed signs of molecular degradation. This one is subtle, but it would have caused a complete power distribution failure within another week of operation. Captain Lyra studied the growing list of problems with mounting concern. Can all of these issues be repaired within your 48-hour deadline? They have to be, David replied simply. Fixing the quantum core without addressing these secondary problems would be like putting a new engine in a car with broken wheels. It might run, but it won't go anywhere safely. What David did next would be remembered in engineering circles for decades to come. Working with components scavenged from the station salvage yards, he began creating hybrid repair solutions that combined technologies from multiple species. He took precision crystals from a defunct Centurion communications array and modified them using manufacturing techniques learned from Vulcan artisans. The resulting components looked nothing like standard draconian parts, but their performance specifications were superior to the originals. This cannot possibly work, Stone muttered as he watched David install power regulator that appeared to be constructed from at least 4 different alien technologies. Why not? David asked, making fine adjustments to the components mounting brackets. Because it violates every principle of coherent system design. You cannot simply combine random technologies and expect them to function properly together. David paused in his work and looked up at the draconian chief engineer. Can't I look at these performance readings? The hybrid regulator is operating at 95% efficiency compared to 82% for your original component. It's also producing 30% less waste heat and showing superior stability under load. Stone examined the diagnostic displays, his expression shifting from disbelief to fascination. But how is this possible? The theoretical framework suggests this combination should not work at all. Maybe the problem is with the theoretical framework, David suggested. Gently, sometimes practical experience teaches you things that theory says are impossible. As word of the humans unconventional method spread through the ship, curious crew members began finding excuses to visit the engineering section. They watched in amazement as David created solutions that their own technical training said should be impossible. He combined crystalline focusing elements from 3 different species to create a quantum matrix stabilizer that outperformed anything in the draconian technical libraries. Most impressive of all, he solved the original cascade failure problem not by replacing the damaged quantum matrix, but by creating a secondary control system that could seamlessly take over. If the primary system failed again, the backup matrix was smaller and simpler than the original, but it was also more robust and easier to maintain. Your solution is elegant, Commander Roth admitted as he studied the secondary matrix design. I had not considered the possibility of a parallel control system. Redundancy is a basic principle of good engineering, David replied. Calibrating the quantum field generators with microscopic precision. If something can fail, it probably will fail eventually. The smart thing is to plan for that failure and have a backup ready. Captain Lyra watched from the observation deck as her ship gradually came back to life around David's repairs. The emergency lighting had been replaced by normal illumination. Disturbing vibrations in the deck plates had smoothed out to barely noticeable levels. Most importantly, the quantum field resonance that had been making everyone's teethache was now contained and stable. Captain, her communications officer called from the bridge. We're receiving status reports from all departments. System functionality is approaching normal parameters across the board. Lyra could hardly believe what she was hearing. All departments. What about the stabilizer problem in the starboard engine room? Repaired and tested, Captain. The human installed some kind of adaptive bearing system that actually performs better than the original specification. As the 36-hour mark approached, David was putting the finishing touches on the quantum drive core itself. The crystalline matrix that had been dark and cold for days now pulsed with contained energy, its internal structure perfect and stable. Around it, hybrid systems from a dozen different species worked in harmony to control and channel the immense forces involved in faster than light travel. All systems show green across the board, Stone reported, his voice filled with wonder and reluctant respect. Quantum field stability is at optimal levels. Power distribution is smooth and all safety interlocks are functioning properly. David emerged from the maintenance access tunnel one final time, exhausted but triumphant. His clothes were stained with exotic fluids and quantum residue. His hair was disheveled and his hands were marked with the burns and cuts that came from working with unfamiliar alien technologies. She's ready for testing, Captain, he announced, but I'd recommend starting with low-power tests before pushing the systems to full capacity. Lyra stared at him in amazement. 36 hours ago her ship had been a dead hulk with a cascade failure that her own engineers had declared unrepayable. Now if the diagnostic readings were accurate, the Crimson Fury was not only operational, but performing better than it ever had before. This seems impossible, she whispered. A lot of good engineering seems impossible until someone actually does it, David replied with a tired smile. Your ship was hurt, but she wasn't broken beyond repair. She just needed someone who was willing to think outside the conventional approaches. As the crew prepared for initial testing of the repaired systems, word began to spread throughout Meridian Station about what the human mechanic had accomplished. Other alien species started to take notice of the remarkable repair job, and several ship captains began making discreet inquiries about David's availability for their own mechanical problems. But for now all attention was focused on the Crimson Fury and the moment of truth that would determine whether David's unconventional methods had truly succeeded or had created an elaborate disaster waiting to happen. The main control room fell silent as Captain Lyra placed her hand on the quantum drive activation controls. Every crew member held their breath, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether their ship lived or died. The diagnostic displays showed perfect readings, but theory and practice were often different things when dealing with experimental repairs. All stations report ready, Commander Roth announced, his voice tight with nervous energy. David stood quietly beside the main engineering console, watching the power flow readings with careful attention. He had done everything he could think of to ensure the repairs would work, but there was always that moment of uncertainty when turning on a system for the first time, especially a system that had been rebuilt using techniques that violated every principle of traditional draconian engineering. Quantum matrix activation. In 3-2-1 mark, the Crimson Fury shuddered slightly as power flowed into the rebuilt quantum drive core. The crystalline matrix began to glow with the soft blue light of contained energy, and the familiar hum of quantum field generation filled the engineering spaces. But something was different. The usual harsh vibration that accompanied draconian quantum drives was gone, replaced by a smooth, almost musical resonance. Core temperature nominal. Chief Engineer Stone reported, his voice filled with wonder. Quantum field stability at optimal levels. Power distribution smooth across all systems. Captain Lyra watched the status displays with growing amazement. Not only were all systems functioning properly, but the performance readings were beyond anything she had ever seen. Engineering. What is our current drive efficiency rating? Stone checked his instruments twice before responding. 118% of design specifications, Captain. And rising. That's impossible. Nevertheless, it is accurate, Stone replied. The quantum field containment is more stable than I have ever seen, and the power conversion efficiency is remarkable. David allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. The hybrid systems were performing exactly as he had hoped, combining the best features of multiple alien technologies into something greater than the sum of its parts. The Centurion crystals provided superior field stability, while human-developed power management techniques reduced energy waste to almost nothing. Request permission to begin flight testing. Lyra said into her communicator. Permission granted, came the reply from Meridian. Station Control, you are cleared for departure from Bay 7, as the Crimson Fury lifted smoothly from the repair dock. Every person aboard could feel the difference in how the ship moved, where once there had been subtle vibrations and occasional power fluctuations, now there was only smooth, effortless acceleration. The quantum drive that had been the ship's greatest weakness was now its greatest strength. Helm, take us to the system edge for deep space trials, Lyra ordered. The flight to the outer system took half the time it normally would have, with the enhanced quantum drive pushing the ship through space with unprecedented efficiency. As they cleared the last navigation beacon, Lyra turned to her navigation officer with an order that would test David's repairs to their limits. Prepare for jump to hyperspace, full power test. David felt his stomach tighten with nervous anticipation. Hyperspace jumps put enormous stress on quantum drive systems, and failures during transition were often catastrophic. If his repairs were going to fail, this would be when it happened. Quantum drive charging to full power, Stone reported. All systems showing optimal parameters. The charging sequence that normally took several minutes was completed in less than 90 seconds. The hybrid power management systems David had installed allowed the ship to channel energy more efficiently than ever before, reducing both charging time and thermal stress on the drive components. Jump drive ready, the helm officer announced. Execute jump. Reality twisted around the Crimson Fury as it slipped into the higher dimensions of hyperspace. But instead of the violent shaking and system alarms that often accompanied military-grade jumps, the transition was smooth as silk. The ship's structure barely vibrated, and the quantum fields remained perfectly stable throughout the entire process. Jump complete, the navigation officer reported with obvious amazement. Hyperspace entry successful. Drive performance exceeded all expectations. Captain Lyra stared at the status displays in disbelief. Her ship was not only functional again, but it was performing better than it ever had, even when it was brand new from the shipyards. The quantum drive efficiency was now reading 122% of original specifications, and the system stability was rock solid. David, she said, turning to the human mechanic who had accomplished the impossible. How did you do this? David was studying the engineering displays with professional satisfaction. Your original design was over complicated, too many redundant safety systems, too much emphasis on traditional approaches that worked but weren't optimal. By combining the best ideas from multiple species and eliminating unnecessary complexity, I was able to create something more efficient than the sum of its parts. But our engineers spent decades perfecting this design, Stone protested. How could a human with no formal training improve on centuries of development? Because I wasn't bound by your assumptions, David replied simply. Your engineers knew too much about how things were supposed to work, so they couldn't see better ways to make them work. Sometimes in Outsur's perspective is exactly what you need to break through old limitations. The hyperspace trial continued for another 2 hours, with the Crimson Fury performing maneuvers that would have been impossible with its original drive configuration. The enhanced efficiency allowed for rapid course changes and sustain high speed travel without the thermal buildup that normally limited draconian ships during extended operations. This is remarkable, Commander Roth observed as he reviewed the test data. We could maintain maximum hyperspace velocity for twice as long as before, with better fuel economy and reduced maintenance requirements. The hybrid power systems are also generating 30% less waste heat. Stone added his professional pride wearing with his amazement at what the human had accomplished. This could revolutionize our understanding of quantum drive technology. Captain Lyra was silent for several minutes, absorbing the implications of what had happened. Her ship had not only been repaired but transformed into something superior to its original design. The human mechanic had accomplished in 36 hours what her own engineers had declared impossible given unlimited time and resources. David, she said finally, I owe you an apology that goes far deeper than simple politeness. The human looked up from the engineering console, surprised by the serious tone in her voice. I insulted you, your species, and your capabilities based on nothing but prejudice and arrogance. Lyra continued, I called you primitive and suggested that human engineering was inferior to draconian technology. I was wrong on every count. David nodded graciously. Apology accepted, Captain. Though I should point out that I've encountered the same attitude from humans dealing with alien technology. Pride and prejudice aren't unique to any single species, perhaps not, but that does not excuse my behavior. Lyra gestured toward the status displays, showing her ship's enhanced performance. What you have accomplished here is not just superior engineering, it is a demonstration of the kind of thinking that my people have forgotten in our pursuit of traditional excellence. Stone stepped forward, his expression serious. With your permission, Captain, I would like to request detailed technical documentation of these repairs. This approach could benefit the entire draconian fleet. Of course, David agreed, though I should warn you that a lot of what I did was intuitive rather than strictly procedural. Teaching someone else to do it might be more complex than simply following a manual. Then perhaps, Lyra said thoughtfully, you would be willing to teach us directly. The suggestion hung in the air between them, representing possibilities that none of them had considered when this unlikely partnership began. As the Crimson Fury completed its trials and prepared to return to normal space, Captain Lyra found herself facing a decision that could reshape her understanding of engineering, cooperation, and the true meaning of technological progress. Captain, her communications officer called from the bridge. We're receiving a priority message from Draconian Fleet Command. They're requesting an immediate status report on our repair progress. Lyra smiled, realizing that she now had very good news to deliver to her superiors. Tell them the Crimson Fury is not only operational but performing at capabilities exceeding original design specifications. We will be ready to proceed with our assigned mission on schedule. As the ship dropped out of hyperspace and began its return journey to Meridian Station, everyone aboard understood that they had witnessed something remarkable. A human mechanic had not only fixed their broken ship but had shown them that the boundaries between species and technologies were more flexible than they had ever imagined. The real test, however, would come when they returned to face the reactions of other Draconian officers, and the broad implications of what David's success meant for the future of interspecies cooperation in the galaxy. 3 days after the successful test flight, the Crimson Fury sat in Meridian Station's primary docking bay, surrounded by a crowd of curious observers. Word of the impossible repair had spread throughout the station's diverse population, and representatives from a dozen different species had come to see the ship that had been transformed by human ingenuity. David found himself in the uncomfortable position of being famous, at least within the small world of the trading station. Ship captains who had never spoken to him before were now asking detailed questions about his techniques. Engineers from multiple species wanted to examine his hybrid repair work. Even the station administrator had stopped by to congratulate him personally, but the attention that mattered most came from an unexpected source. Human David looked up from his workbench to find Captain Lyra standing in the entrance to his workshop. She had traded her military uniform for civilian clothes, though her bearing remained unmistakably naval. Behind her stood 2 other Draconian officers, their expressions curious but respectful. Captain David acknowledged, setting down the plasma calibrator he had been repairing. How can I help you? I have come to make you an offer, Lyra said formally. But first, I owe you something more than a simple apology. She stepped fully into the workshop, followed by her companions. David recognized Commander Roth, but the third Draconian was unfamiliar, an older female with the insignia of a fleet engineer. David Quinn, Lyra continued. When I first entered this workshop 3 days ago, I carried with me the prejudices and assumptions of my entire species. I believed that Draconians were inherently superior to humans in all matters of technology and engineering. I believed that our ancient knowledge and traditional methods were the pinnacle of achievement. She paused, looking around the workshop at the eclectic mix of alien tools and components that had made David's miracle possible. I was wrong. Not just mistaken, but fundamentally wrong about the nature of intelligence, creativity, and problem solving. What you accomplished with my ship was not just superior engineering. It was a demonstration of the kind of innovative thinking that my people have lost in our pursuit of traditional perfection. The older Draconian stepped forward, her golden eyes bright with interest. I am Chief Fleet Engineer Dana, she introduced herself. I have spent the past 2 days examining your repair work and studying your technical approach. Your methods are revolutionary. David felt a flush of pride at the praise, but he tried to remain modest. I just solved the problems I found using the best tools available. Nothing revolutionary about that. On the contrary, Dana replied, your approach challenges fundamental assumptions about how complex systems should be designed and maintained. The hybrid technologies you created shouldn't work according to traditional engineering theory, yet they perform better than our original components. Commander Roth pulled out a data pad and showed David a series of performance graphs. The Crimson Fury has completed 6 hyperspace jumps since your repairs, all at maximum efficiency. The quantum drive stability is unprecedented, and fuel consumption is down by 28% compared to baseline. More importantly, Lyra added, you solved problems that we didn't even know existed. The secondary system failures you identified and corrected would have caused catastrophic breakdowns within weeks of our return to service. David nodded thoughtfully. Complex systems are like living organisms. Everything is connected to everything. Else, you can't fix one part without considering how it affects all the other parts. Exactly, Dana said with obvious excitement. This holistic approach is what draconian engineering has been missing. We've become so focused on perfecting individual components that we've forgotten how to optimize the interactions between them. Captain Lyra stepped closer to David's workbench, her expression serious, which brings me to my offer. The Draconian Imperial Navy would like to hire you as a special engineering consultant. You would travel with the Crimson Fury on our current mission, providing technical expertise in training our crew in your methods. The offer was tempting, but David had learned to be cautious about military contracts. What exactly would this mission involve? Reconnaissance in the Outer Rim sectors, Lyra explained. We'll be operating independently for several months, gathering intelligence on pirate activities and mapping new hyperspace routes. It's dangerous work, but it would give you the opportunity to test your repair techniques under real operational conditions. And Dana added, it would allow us to document your methods properly. If your techniques prove as effective as they appear, we want to share them with the entire Draconian fleet. David considered the proposal carefully. Working with the Draconian military would be a significant step up from his current status as an independent mechanic, but it would also mean leaving behind the freedom and flexibility he had enjoyed at Meridian Station. I'd need to bring my own tools and have final authority over all engineering decisions, he said finally. Agreed, Lyra replied without hesitation, and I work with your engineering staff, not around them. If I'm going to teach them my methods, they need to be willing to learn, even if it means admitting that some of their traditional approaches aren't optimal. Chief Engineer Stone, who had been standing quietly in the background, stepped forward. David, I have already begun studying your repair documentation. What you accomplished challenges everything I thought I knew about quantum engineering. I would be honored to learn from you. The admission from the proud Draconian engineer carried significant weight. If Stone could overcome his prejudices and embrace new ideas, then perhaps there was hope for broader cooperation between their species. There is one more thing, Lyra said, her tone becoming more personal. I want you to know that this offer comes not from desperation or necessity, but from genuine respect for your abilities. You have earned the right to be treated as an equal, not just by me, but by the entire Draconian Imperial Navy. David extended his hand in the traditional human gesture of agreement, and this time Lyra took it without hesitation. Her scaled hand was warm and surprisingly gentle, the claws carefully positioned to avoid causing injury. Captain, David said with a smile, I think this is going to be a very interesting partnership. As they shook hands, both of them understood that they were participating in something larger than a simple employment contract. They were building a bridge between two species that had previously viewed each other with suspicion and condescension. The success of their cooperation could reshape relationships throughout the galaxy. When do we leave? David asked. Tomorrow morning, Lyra replied. The Crimson Fury is scheduled to depart At 800 station time, then I'd better start packing. David looked around his workshop, realizing that he would need to transport his most essential tools and equipment to the ship. This is going to require some careful planning. Actually, Commander Roth interjected, we've already prepared a complete engineering workshop aboard the ship. Chief Engineer Dana supervised the installation personally. We want you to feel at home, Dana explained. Your methods require flexibility and access to diverse technologies. The workshop includes tools and components from 15 different species, plus fabrication equipment for creating hybrid components as needed. David was impressed by their thoroughness and foresight. They had clearly put significant thought into making this partnership successful rather than simply offering him a token position. As the Draconian officers prepared to leave, Captain Lyra turned back one final time. David, what you have taught us goes beyond engineering techniques. You have shown us that true strength comes not from technological superiority or ancient pride, but from the willingness to learn, adapt, and respect the contributions of others. That's a lesson my own species is still learning. David replied, maybe working together will help both our peoples grow wiser. After the Draconians departed, David spent the evening preparing for his new adventure. As he packed his tools and personal belongings, he reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. 3 days ago, he had been just another independent mechanic working on the fringes of galactic civilization. Now he was about to become a consultant to one of the most advanced military forces in known space. The next morning, as David walked up the boarding ramp of the Crimson Fury, he was greeted by the sight of Draconian crew members working alongside human technicians to install some of his hybrid components in other ship systems. The integration was voluntary and enthusiastic, with both species sharing knowledge and techniques freely. Welcome aboard, Captain Lyra said as she met him at the airlock. Are you ready to help us explore the unknown? David looked around at the bustling activity, seeing the future of interspecies cooperation taking shape before his eyes. Captain, I've been ready for this my whole life. I just didn't know it until now. As the Crimson Fury departed Meridian Station and jumped into hyperspace, its hybrid systems performed flawlessly. The ship that had once been a symbol of Draconian technological pride had become something greater, testament to what could be achieved when different species worked together with mutual respect and shared purpose in the depth of space, where survival often depended on innovation rather than tradition. The partnership between human ingenuity and Draconian sophistication would prove that the galaxy's greatest achievements came not from any single species, but from the willingness to learn from each other and build something better together. The dragon had found her mechanic, and in doing so had discovered that wisdom truly could come from the most unexpected sources.